Eleanor's hands were still shaking when she pulled the yellowed envelope from inside the hollowed-out dictionary, and the moment she saw Harold's handwriting, "My true last will and testament," she knew their dead friend had been trying to tell them something the lawyers never heard. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, tell us where you're watching from. And to make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or life-changing discoveries, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. "Tom," Eleanor whispered, her voice cutting through the musty silence of Storage Unit 184. "Tom, you need to see this." Her husband looked up from the box of old National Geographic magazines he'd been sorting. They'd been at this for 3 hours now, methodically going through their late friend Harold Whitmore's belongings, trying to honor the promise they'd made at his funeral 6 weeks ago. Harold's nephew Derek had given them the key, told them to take whatever they wanted before he hired someone to haul it all to the dump. Tom straightened, his knees protesting the movement. At 71, he felt every hour spent crouching over dusty boxes. "What is it, El?" Eleanor held up the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Harold used for important correspondence back when he practiced law. But it was the wax seal on the back that made Tom's breath catch. Harold's seal, the one with his initials intertwined with scales of justice. "Where did you find that?" Tom crossed the small unit, his shadow falling across the precarious stacks of boxes and furniture that represented 68 years of Harold Whitmore's life. "Inside this," Eleanor indicated the thick dictionary, its pages carved out to create a hidden compartment. "I was going to throw it away, it's falling apart, but something made me open it first." Tom took the envelope carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. Harold's handwriting was unmistakable, bold, slightly slanted, written with the fountain pen he'd insisted on using even after everyone else switched to computers. The envelope was sealed, untouched. "This can't be what I think it is," Tom said. "There's a date," Eleanor pointed to the upper left corner. "March 15th, 2019. That's 5 years ago, 2 years before he went into the nursing home." Tom's mind raced. He'd known Harold Whitmore for 43 years, ever since they'd bought neighboring houses on Maple Street. Their children had grown up together. They'd spent countless summer evenings on each other's porches, solving the world's problems over gin and tonics. And when Harold's wife, Patricia, died 10 years ago, Tom and Eleanor had been the ones to sit with him through the darkest nights. "We should open it," Eleanor said, but her voice wavered. "We should call Derek. This is his family's business." "Derek," Eleanor's tone hardened. "Derek, who put Harold in the cheapest nursing home he could find, who visited maybe twice in 3 years, who couldn't even be bothered to go through his uncle's things himself." Tom didn't argue. They'd both been appalled by Derek's treatment of Harold in his final years. The younger man had taken control of Harold's finances through a power of attorney, sold his house without consulting him, and essentially abandoned him to die alone in a facility that smelled of bleach and resignation. "Harold wanted us to find this," Eleanor continued. "Why else hide it in a dictionary and store it here? He knew Derek would never look through these things carefully, but he knew we would." Tom studied the envelope. "If this is what we think it is, it could change everything." They looked at each other, the weight of the moment settling over them. Tom and Eleanor Parker had lived quiet, honest lives. He'd been a high school teacher, she'd worked as a librarian. They'd raised 3 children, paid their taxes, never broken so much as a parking regulation. The idea of opening someone else's sealed will, of potentially interfering with an estate, went against every instinct they had. But this was Harold. Harold, who'd helped them refinance their house when Tom lost his job in the 2008 recession. Harold, who'd written letters of recommendation for each of their children. Harold, who'd sat with them in the hospital waiting room when their daughter Sarah had her emergency surgery, refusing to leave until he knew she was safe. "He trusted us," Eleanor said quietly. "Whatever's in here, he wanted us to know about it." Tom made his decision. He carefully worked his finger under the wax seal, trying not to damage it more than necessary. The seal cracked cleanly, and he withdrew several sheets of thick paper covered in Harold's precise handwriting. They read in silence, standing in the dimness of the storage unit, and with each paragraph, the world they thought they knew shifted on its axis. The document was indeed a will, meticulously detailed, dated, and signed. But it bore no resemblance to the will that had been probated after Harold's death, the one that left everything to his nephew Derek. This will told a different story entirely. "Oh, Harold," Eleanor breathed, tears filling her eyes. The bulk of Harold's estate, his house, his savings, his collection of rare books, his investment portfolio, was left not to Derek, but to establish a foundation. The Harold and Patricia Whitmore Foundation for Legal Aid, dedicated to providing free legal services to low-income families in their county. Derek was to receive only a small cash bequest of $20,000. But that wasn't all. The will included detailed explanations, almost like a letter, written in Harold's careful hand. "To whom it may concern." And I hope that's Tom and Eleanor, because if you're reading this, it means my contingency plan worked. I write this in sound mind and body, though I know my time for making such claims is limited. I've been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Dr. Richardson says I have perhaps 2 to 3 good years left before the decline becomes significant. My nephew Derek has always been eager for his inheritance. I've watched him watch me, calculating, waiting. When I told him about my diagnosis, I saw something in his eyes that chilled me. Relief, perhaps, or opportunity. I've drafted a simple will, leaving everything to Derek, and I've told him it's the only will. I've told my lawyer the same. But this document, the one you're holding, this is my true testament. Tom had to stop reading. His hands were shaking too badly. Eleanor took the pages from him and continued aloud. I know what Derek will do. He'll take control through power of attorney, and he'll isolate me from my friends, especially Tom and Eleanor, who would notice things. He'll put me somewhere cheap where no one asks questions, and he'll make sure I never have the opportunity to change my will or speak to a lawyer unsupervised. I wish I were wrong about my nephew, but I've practiced law for 40 years, and I know human nature. I know greed, and I've seen Derek's character clearly since he was old enough to lie about stealing cookies from Patricia's jar. This foundation is my legacy. Patricia and I never had children of our own, but we believed deeply in the power of justice, in the importance of legal representation for everyone, not just those who can afford it. We talked often about creating something that would outlive us. This is that something. Tom and Eleanor, because I know it's you reading this, I need your help. I need you to take this will to Judge Margaret Chen at the county courthouse. She and I attended law school together 60 years ago, and she's the only person I trust to handle this properly. Tell her everything. She'll know what to do. Derek will fight this. He'll claim I was incompetent when I wrote this will. He'll say it's a forgery, that you've manipulated me, that I was delusional. He'll use every tool at his disposal to discredit this document and maintain control of the estate. But I've prepared for that. In box 47 of this storage unit, I've labeled it clearly, you'll find evidence. Medical records from Dr. Richardson showing I was competent when I wrote this will. Correspondence with foundation lawyers about setting up the legal aid organization. Proof of Derek's financial exploitation during his power of attorney. Small things he thought I wouldn't notice. Transfers he made to himself that were necessary expenses. I'm sorry to burden you with this. You've been better friends to me than I deserved, especially after Patricia died. You kept me tethered to life when I wanted to let go. This is too much to ask, I know. Derek will make your lives difficult. He has resources and anger and a sense of entitlement that makes him dangerous. But I have to ask anyway, because if this foundation doesn't exist, my life, Patricia's life, all our work, all our dreams, they fade into nothing. Derek will buy a bigger house and a nicer car, and within a generation, no one will remember that Harold and Patricia Whitmore existed. But if you help me, we can change lives. We can help families stay together. We can help people fight for custody of their children, defend themselves against eviction, navigate the immigration system, escape domestic violence. We can be, even in death, what we always wanted to be in life, servants of justice. The choice is yours. You can seal this envelope back up, put it back in the dictionary, and walk away. No one will ever know. Derek keeps his inheritance, you keep your peace, and the world keeps spinning. Or you can fight for me one last time. Fight for Patricia. Fight for the dream we shared. Whatever you decide, know that you've already given me more than I could have asked for. You gave me friendship when I was lonely, purpose when I was adrift, and family when I had none. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Harold won't. Harold Whitmore. Eleanor finished reading and carefully refolded the pages. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller, more oppressive. The weight of decision pressed down on them. "Box 47, Tom finally said. "We should find it." Eleanor nodded. They searched through the unit's careful chaos and eventually found the box exactly where Harold said it would be, labeled in thick black marker. Inside was everything he'd promised: medical evaluations, correspondence, financial records, even a video recording on a thumb drive labeled Competency Statement, March 2019. "He thought of everything," Eleanor murmured. "He was still sharp when he made this plan." "Derek won't go down without a fight," Tom said. "Harold was right about that. And we're talking about, what did the will say? An estate worth approximately $2 million. $1,800,000, according to the accounting Harold provided. Tom whistled softly. That's life-changing money. Derek will hire lawyers, investigators. He'll try to destroy us. I know. We could lose. Harold's dementia diagnosis could work against us, even with the medical evidence. Derek could argue undue influence, that we manipulated Harold when he was vulnerable. I know that, too." Tom looked at his wife of 49 years. Eleanor had her librarian face on, the expression she wore when a patron tried to challenge a book she believed belonged on the shelves. It meant her mind was made up, and no amount of logic would change it. "You want to do this," Tom said. "Don't you?" Did he? Tom thought about Harold, about the man who'd taught him to play chess on quiet Sunday afternoons, about the friend who'd shown up with a casserole and a six-pack of beer the day after Tom's mother died, who'd said nothing, just sat with him in comfortable silence, about the lawyer who'd spent countless hours doing pro bono work, who told Tom once that justice shouldn't be a luxury item. "Yes," Tom admitted. "God help us, yes, I do." Eleanor smiled, fierce and determined. "Then we'd better get to work. We have a lot to sort through, and we need to understand everything before we approach Judge Chen." They spent the rest of the day in the storage unit, going through Harold's carefully organized evidence. The man had been thorough, documenting everything. There were bank statements showing Derek had transferred nearly $50,000 from Harold's account to his own over 3 years, always labeling them as care expenses or medical necessities. But Harold had kept the actual medical bills, showing the care home only cost half what Derek claimed. There were emails between Derek and the nursing home administrator discussing ways to limit Harold's contact with outside influences, clearly meaning Tom and Eleanor. There was even a recording of a phone conversation where Derek explicitly told the administrator to screen Harold's calls and visitors. "He isolated him," Eleanor said, her voice thick with anger and grief. "Just like Harold predicted." Tom found a folder containing legal correspondence. Harold had clearly consulted with lawyers about establishing the foundation, getting everything properly structured before his cognition declined. There were letters from 3 different attorneys, all attesting to Harold's mental capacity at the time. As the afternoon wore into evening, they assembled a complete picture. Harold Whitmore had known exactly what was coming. He'd prepared meticulously, creating an insurance policy against his nephew's greed. And he'd chosen Tom and Eleanor as the executors of his true intentions. "We should go home," Eleanor finally said, as darkness fell outside the unit. "We need to think about this overnight, make sure we're really prepared for what comes next." Tom agreed. They locked up the storage unit carefully, taking only the will and a few key documents with them. As they drove home through the quiet streets of their suburban neighborhood, Tom felt the enormity of what they were about to undertake settling into his bones. At home, Eleanor made tea while Tom sat at their kitchen table staring at the envelope that contained Harold's will. Their kitchen had been the site of so many important conversations over the years, deciding to have a 3rd child, discussing Tom's job offer that would have required relocation, planning how to care for Eleanor's father in his final years. Now it would be the place where they decided whether to upend their peaceful retirement to fight for a dead man's dreams. "Sarah called while you were in the shower," Eleanor said, bringing 2 cups of chamomile tea to the table. "I told her we were sorting through Harold's things. She asked if we were okay." Their oldest daughter had always been perceptive. "What did you tell her?" "That we'd call her tomorrow, that we had some decisions to make." Tom sipped his tea. "We should tell the kids. Before we do anything, they deserve to know what we're getting into." "Agreed." Eleanor wrapped her hands around her mug. "You know they'll worry." "They're our children. Worrying is their job." Eleanor smiled slightly. Then her expression grew serious. "Tom, I've been thinking. If we do this, when we do this, we can't go in halfway. Derek will look for any weakness, any inconsistency. We need to be completely committed. I am committed." "Are you?" She met his eyes. "Because this could get ugly. Derek might sue us personally. He might make accusations, try to damage our reputation. Our peaceful retirement, our quiet life, all of that could disappear." Tom set down his mug. "Do you remember what Harold told us after Patricia died? We were sitting on his porch, and he was drunk, only time I ever saw him that way. He said he'd wasted too much of his life on comfortable choices, on playing it safe. He said Patricia had always pushed him to take risks for things that mattered, and now that she was gone, he had no one to make him brave. I remember. We made him brave again, Elle. We pulled him back from that edge. We gave him 3 more years of purpose and friendship." Tom reached across the table and took her hand, and now he's asking us to be brave for him. How can we say no? Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "We can't. I just wanted to make sure you understood the cost." "I do, but some things are worth the cost." They sat in their kitchen as the night deepened outside, drinking tea and talking through logistics. They would call Judge Chen first thing in the morning, request a meeting. They would organize all of Harold's evidence into a clear, compelling presentation. They would contact each of their children and explain the situation, and they would prepare themselves for Derek's inevitable fury. "He'll come after us," Eleanor said. "Personally, I mean. This isn't just about money for him, it's about pride. We're saying his uncle didn't trust him, preferred strangers to family. That will enrage him." "Let it." Tom's voice was firm. "We have truth on our side. We have evidence. We have Harold's clear intentions, documented when he was still competent. Derek can rage all he wants." But as Tom lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, he felt the first flutters of real fear. They were 2 elderly people taking on a wealthy, angry man with everything to lose. Derek Whitmore was a commercial real estate developer with connections throughout the county. He sat on boards, played golf with judges and politicians, had resources Tom and Eleanor couldn't match. What if they failed? What if all of Harold's careful planning came to nothing? What if Derek found a way to discredit the will, to make Tom and Eleanor look like con artists or manipulators? Beside him, Eleanor shifted in her sleep, and Tom was reminded that he wasn't alone in this. Whatever came, they would face it together, just as they'd faced everything for 49 years. And maybe that's what Harold had counted on. He'd known them well enough to understand that once they committed to something, they saw it through. Once they took up a cause, they didn't quit just because the road got hard. Tom finally drifted to sleep near dawn and dreamed of Harold, younger, healthier, standing in a courtroom with Patricia at his side, both of them smiling. Morning came with Eleanor already up, coffee brewing, and their 3 children scheduled for a video call at 9. Tom showered and dressed carefully, as if preparing for battle. In a way, he supposed he was. The video call was difficult. Sarah, their oldest at 46, immediately understood the implications. "Dad, Mom, this could get really complicated. You're talking about challenging a probated will. The legal fees alone." "We're not asking for your permission," Eleanor interrupted gently. "We're telling you what we're going to do. We wanted you to hear it from us first." Their son Michael, 44, was more blunt. "Derek Whitmore is a son of a bitch. I've done business with him. He tried to lowball me on a contract 3 years ago, then spread rumors when I walked away. He'll destroy you if he can." "Then we'd better be careful," Tom said. Their youngest, Jennifer, was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Uncle Harold loved you both so much. He talked about you constantly near the end, before Derek cut off contact. He said you were the best people he knew." Her voice cracked slightly. "You have to do this, for him." After the call ended, Tom and Eleanor drove to the county courthouse. Judge Margaret Chen agreed to see them during her lunch break, and they were ushered into her chambers at noon. Judge Chen was elegant and precise, in her early 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an immaculate bun. She listened without interrupting as Tom and Eleanor explained the situation, presenting Harold's will and the supporting documentation. When they finished, Judge Chen sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Harold Whitmore was one of the finest attorneys I've ever known. Brilliant legal mind, uncompromising ethics. She picked up the will, examining it closely. "This is his handwriting, his seal. I have no doubt this document is authentic." "So you'll help us?" Eleanor asked. "I'll do what the law requires," Judge Chen said carefully. "But you need to understand the position you're in. You're alleging that a duly probated will is fraudulent, that Derek Whitmore engaged in elder abuse and financial exploitation, and that Harold's true intentions were deliberately subverted. These are serious accusations." "They're also true," Tom said. "Truth and provable truth are different things." Judge Chen tapped the will thoughtfully. "Harold was smart to document everything, but Derek will argue that this hidden will is the product of manipulation, that you took advantage of Harold's cognitive decline. The fact that you were his close friends actually works against you in some ways. It gives credence to claims of undue influence." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "So there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that," Judge Chen smiled slightly. "I said you need to understand the battlefield. But Harold chose his champions well. You're credible, you have no obvious motive for personal gain, and most importantly, you have extensive documentation. The video testimony alone is powerful. Harold explicitly states his intentions while demonstrably competent." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "Here's what's going to happen. I'll need to review all of the evidence thoroughly. If I determine there's sufficient cause, I can order the probated will set aside and open an investigation into potential fraud and elder abuse. Derek will hire expensive lawyers. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. It could take years. We're retired, Tom said. We have time. And your finances? Legal challenges like this can be expensive, even when you're not directly paying attorneys. Tom and Eleanor exchanged glances. They'd discussed this. We have our savings, Eleanor said. Our house is paid off. If necessary, we can sell some investments. Judge Chen studied them for a long moment. You're serious about this? Completely serious, Tom confirmed. Why? The judge's question was direct. You could walk away. Forget you ever found that will. Live out your retirement in peace. Why risk everything for a dead man's dream? Tom thought about how to answer. Finally, he said, because Harold was our friend, because he trusted us, and because if we walk away, we become the kind of people who choose comfort over doing what's right. I don't want to be that person, Your Honor. I don't want my grandchildren to grow up thinking their grandfather was someone who turned his back when it mattered. Judge Chen nodded slowly. All right, leave everything with me. I'll need a few days to review the materials thoroughly. In the meantime, say nothing to Derek or anyone else. No social media posts, no casual mentions to neighbors. This needs to stay completely confidential until I'm ready to act. Understood, Eleanor said. As they left the courthouse, Tom felt both relieved and terrified. They'd taken the first step, crossed a line they couldn't uncross. There was no going back now. The next 3 days were torture. They went through the motions of their normal routine, grocery shopping, watering the garden, attending their book club meeting, but everything felt surreal, as if they were actors in a play about their own lives. Tom kept expecting Derek to somehow find out, to show up at their door demanding answers. But Derek remained oblivious. According to Harold's will, he'd already sold his uncle's house and consolidated the assets. He probably thought he'd gotten away with it cleanly. On the 4th day, Judge Chen called. Come to my chambers at 2 o'clock. Bring all of the original documents. The judge's expression was grave when they arrived. I've reviewed everything multiple times. The evidence is compelling. Harold was clearly competent when he created this will, and there's substantial proof of Derek's financial exploitation. She paused. I'm going to move forward. I'll be issuing an order tomorrow morning to freeze the estate assets and set aside the probated will pending a full investigation. Eleanor gripped Tom's hand tightly. Derek Whitmore will be served with notification by the end of business tomorrow. He'll be required to appear for a hearing next week where he can present his objections. Judge Chen's expression softened slightly. He's going to be shocked and furious. He'll come after you both. Are you prepared for that? We are, Tom said, hoping it was true. There's something else you should know, Judge Chen continued. I took the liberty of contacting several of Harold's former colleagues, attorneys who knew him well. I wanted their assessment of his mental state in his final years. 3 of them told me the same story. They visited Harold at the nursing home and found him lucid, sharp, frustrated by his confinement. One attorney, Marcus Webb, said Harold tried to tell him about a will that Derek didn't know about, but Derek arrived during the visit and had Marcus removed from the premises. Why didn't this Marcus Webb do anything? Eleanor asked. He did. He reported his concerns to Adult Protective Services. But by the time they investigated, Harold's condition had deteriorated significantly. APS concluded there was no case to pursue. Judge Chen shook her head. Harold knew he was running out of time. That's why he hid the will where he knew you'd eventually find it. Tom felt a wave of sadness wash over him. Harold had been trapped, aware of what was happening to him, unable to stop it. The loneliness and frustration he must have felt in those final years was almost unbearable to contemplate. We won't let him down, Tom said quietly. Whatever happens, we'll see this through. They left the courthouse and went home to wait. That night, Tom couldn't eat dinner. He kept thinking about Derek, about the explosion that was coming. Eleanor seemed calmer, but he noticed she checked the locks on their doors twice before bed. The next morning, Judge Chen's order was issued. By noon, news had spread through the local legal community. By 2 o'clock, Derek Whitmore knew. Tom and Eleanor were in their backyard, Eleanor tending her roses while Tom read the newspaper, when Derek's Mercedes screeched into their driveway. He emerged from the car like a storm, his face purple with rage. "You bastards!" Derek shouted, storming through their side gate without invitation. "You conniving, manipulative bastards!" Tom stood, positioning himself between Derek and Eleanor. "Derek, you need to leave. If you have something to say it through your lawyer." "My lawyer! My lawyer!" Derek was shaking with fury. "You stole from me! You manipulated my uncle! You forged documents! "We did nothing of the kind," Eleanor said calmly, though Tom could see her hands trembling. "We found your uncle's true will and brought it to the appropriate authority. Everything else is in the hands of the court." "That will is a forgery! Harold would never! He left everything to me! I was his only family!" "You were his blood relative," Tom corrected, "but you stopped being his family the day you isolated him in that nursing home and stole from his accounts." Derek stepped forward menacingly, and for a moment Tom thought he might actually become violent. But then Derek seemed to collect himself, his fury calcifying into something colder and more dangerous. "You have no idea what you've started," Derek said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I will bury you. I will take everything you have. When I'm done, you'll wish you'd never heard the name Harold Whitmore." "Are you threatening us?" Eleanor asked, "because my phone has been recording this entire conversation." Derek's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't noticed Eleanor's phone, positioned discreetly on the patio table. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to his car, peeling out of the driveway fast enough to leave rubber marks on the street. Tom sat down heavily. "That went well. We should file a police report," Eleanor said. "Document his threats." They did, though the officer who took their report seemed skeptical that Derek would actually do anything violent. "Sounds like a family dispute over money," he said dismissively. "These things usually work themselves out." "We're not family," Tom pointed out. "We're just friends trying to honor a dead man's wishes." The officer's expression shifted slightly, becoming more sympathetic. "Then you're good people. But be careful. Money makes people crazy." The hearing the following week was surreal. Derek arrived with 2 expensive lawyers, both wearing expressions of professional disdain. Tom and Eleanor sat alone on the other side of the courtroom, though Judge Chen had appointed a special attorney to represent Harold's estate interests. Derek's lawyers argued that the will was a forgery, that Harold had been mentally incompetent, that Tom and Eleanor had manipulated a vulnerable old man, though they couldn't explain what personal gain, since the will didn't benefit Tom and Eleanor at all. The estate attorney presented Harold's evidence methodically: medical evaluations, the video testimony, correspondence with foundation lawyers, documentation of Derek's financial exploitation. Harold had been thorough, creating a paper trail that was difficult to refute. Most powerful was the video testimony. Judge Chen played it in open court, and everyone watched as Harold, clearly lucid, speaking in careful, measured tones. "My nephew Derek believes he is entitled to my estate," Harold said on the recording. "But inheritance is not an entitlement. It is a gift. And I choose not to give that gift to someone who has shown me only greed and disrespect. Instead, I choose to give it to a cause Patricia and I believed in deeply: justice for those who cannot afford it. This foundation will be our legacy, our way of continuing to serve even after death." When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Even Derek's lawyers looked uncomfortable. Judge Chen called a recess, then returned an hour later with her decision. "Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to believe that the will probated was not Harold Whitmore's true last testament. I'm ordering the estate reopened, the assets to remain frozen, and a full investigation into allegations of financial elder abuse. Mr. Derek Whitmore, you are ordered to provide complete accounting of all transactions made on behalf of your uncle during your power of attorney period. Derek shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You're believing con artists over family? Mr. Whitmore, sit down, Judge Chen said sharply. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. She waited until Derek reluctantly sat. I'm also ordering an evaluation of both wills by independent forensic document examiners. We will determine conclusively which document represents Harold Whitmore's true intentions. After the hearing, Derek cornered them in the courthouse parking lot. His lawyers had apparently left because he was alone and unrestrained. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'm going to prove you forged that will. I'm going to prove you manipulated him. And when I do, I'm going to sue you for everything you have." "Derek," Eleanor said quietly, "Harold was our friend. We loved him. Don't you understand? This isn't about money for us. It's about honoring his wishes." "Honoring his wishes?" Derek laughed bitterly. "He was my uncle, my blood. You were just neighbors who got too involved." "Harold was weak after my aunt died, and you took advantage of that weakness to worm your way into his life." "We supported him when he was grieving," Tom said. "We gave him friendship when he was lonely. What did you give him, Derek, besides a cheap nursing home and stolen money?" Derek's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Tom thought he might actually throw a punch. Instead, Derek leaned in close. "You're old. Both of you. Weak. How long do you think you can keep fighting? How many years do you have left? I can drag this out forever. I can file motion after motion, appeal after appeal. I can make this last until you're dead." "Then that's what you'll do," Eleanor said, "but we're not backing down." Derek stared at them for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. In the car driving home, Tom's hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the steering wheel. Eleanor drove instead, and they were both silent until they pulled into their driveway. "He's right," Tom finally said. "He can drag this out for years. We're 71 years old, Elle. What if we don't live long enough to see this through?" Eleanor turned off the engine and looked at him. "Then our children will continue. I'll talk to Sarah tomorrow. We'll set up provisions, make sure the fight goes on even if we can't." "This is so much bigger than we thought." "I know." She took his hand. "Are you sorry we started this?" Tom thought about Harold, about late-night conversations on the porch, about a man who'd spent his life fighting for justice and died alone in a facility that smelled of bleach and defeat. He thought about Patricia, who'd believed good people had an obligation to make the world better. He thought about the foundation Harold had dreamed of, the lives it could change. "No," Tom said, "I'm not sorry. Scared, yes. Exhausted already, but not sorry." The investigation took months. Forensic document examiners confirmed that both wills were written by Harold. Both were authentic. The hidden will predated the probated will by almost 2 years. Medical experts testified that Harold had shown no signs of significant cognitive decline until late 2020, well after the hidden will was created. The evidence of Derek's financial exploitation was damning. He'd taken nearly $60,000 from Harold's accounts over 3 years, far more than the nursing home costs justified. Bank records showed he'd used his uncle's money to pay his own mortgage, buy a boat, even take a vacation to Turks and Caicos. But Derek's lawyers were skilled. They created doubt where they could, argued that Harold's dementia had started earlier than diagnosed, suggested that Tom and Eleanor had their own subtle financial motivations, perhaps hoping for gratitude money from the foundation or seeking social status. The case dragged through the courts. Depositions, evaluations, expert testimonies. Tom and Eleanor's lives became consumed by the legal battle. They spent thousands of dollars on incidental expenses, travel to meetings, copying documents, consultation fees. Their savings, built carefully over decades of modest living, began to dwindle. Their children worried constantly. Michael wanted them to hire their own lawyer, despite Judge Chen's assurance that the estate attorney represented Harold's interests adequately. Sarah called every few days, checking on their health, their stress levels. Jennifer started researching fundraising options, determined to help if finances became desperate. The local community was divided. Some people admired Tom and Eleanor's dedication to their friends' wishes. Others whispered that they were interfering in family business, that blood should come first. Derek worked his connections, spreading carefully worded doubts about the Parkers' motivations. Tom and Eleanor found themselves isolated in ways they hadn't expected. Some of their longtime friends stopped calling, uncomfortable with the conflict or influenced by Derek's insinuations. Their book club meetings became awkward, with certain members avoiding them. But others rallied around them. Harold's former law partner, Edward Morrison, reached out and offered to provide character testimony without charge. Marcus Webb, the attorney who tried to help Harold, submitted a detailed affidavit about his nursing home visit and Derek's suspicious behavior. Several of Harold's former clients came forward with stories of his generosity and commitment to justice. 8 months into the legal battle, Tom had a minor heart attack. The doctor said it was stress-induced, a warning that he needed to slow down, reduce anxiety. Eleanor was terrified. "We should stop," she told Tom in his hospital room. "We've done what we could. Harold would understand." But Tom shook his head. "We're winning, Elle. Derek's case is falling apart. The forensic accountants found even more evidence of theft. We can't quit now. I'd rather have you alive than have justice for Harold." Tom took her hand weakly. "If I die tomorrow, I die knowing I fought for something that mattered. Isn't that better than dying peacefully having done nothing?" Eleanor cried then, long and hard, and Tom held her as best he could with an IV in his arm and monitors beeping around them. They'd been married 49 years, had built a life of safety and comfort, and now in their twilight they'd chosen chaos and conflict. Sometimes Eleanor wondered if they'd been foolish. But then she'd remember Harold's face at Patricia's funeral, the lost look in his eyes. She'd remember how they'd pulled him back from that edge, how his expression had brightened when he saw them, how he'd called their house his safe harbor. And she knew they'd made the right choice, even if it cost them everything. Tom recovered, but more slowly than the doctors hoped. He was frailer now, moved more carefully. Eleanor watched him with constant anxiety, terrified of losing him to this battle they'd chosen to fight. The case finally came to trial 14 months after they'd found Harold's hidden will. The courtroom was packed. Harold's former colleagues, Derek's business associates, curious locals who'd followed the case in the newspaper. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Expert after expert testified. Tom and Eleanor spent hours on the witness stand, Derek's lawyers trying to break them down, to catch them in inconsistencies, to prove they'd manipulated Harold. But their story never changed because it was the truth. They'd been Harold's friends. They'd found his will, they'd honored his wishes. Simple as that. The most dramatic moment came when Derek himself took the stand. Under cross-examination, he admitted he'd known about his uncle's dementia diagnosis before taking control of his finances. He admitted he'd limited Harold's contact with Tom and Eleanor. He admitted the nursing home expenses didn't match the amount he'd withdrawn from Harold's accounts. "Where did that extra money go, Mr. Whitmore?" the estate attorney asked. "Various expenses. Uncle Harold's care was complicated." "Can you provide receipts for these expenses?" Derek couldn't. The forensic accountant had already testified that the money had gone to Derek's personal accounts, used for his own purposes. "You stole from your uncle, didn't you?" the attorney pressed. I borrowed against my future inheritance. There's a difference. Did Harold know about these borrowings? Derek hesitated. He was no longer competent to make such decisions. So you decided for him. You decided he would lend you money, money he never agreed to lend, that you never intended to repay. That's theft, Mr. Whitmore. Derek's composure cracked. He was going to leave it to me anyway. I was just accessing it a little early. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Chen called for order, but the damage was done. Derek had essentially confessed to financial elder abuse on the stand. The trial concluded with closing arguments. Derek's lawyers argued that Harold had been confused, that his true wishes were represented in the later will, that the hidden will was the product of earlier concerns that Harold had later resolved by leaving everything to family. The estate attorney's closing was simpler. Harold Whitmore had been a brilliant legal mind who'd planned meticulously for the end of his life. He'd known his nephew's character. He'd predicted Derek's actions with eerie accuracy. He'd created a paper trail that was ironclad, and he'd trusted his friends to honor his true wishes. Judge Chen took 2 weeks to deliberate. Tom and Eleanor waited in an agony of suspense. Tom's health remained fragile. Eleanor had developed stress-related migraines that left her bedridden for days at a time. "Whatever happens, we did our best," Tom told her one evening as they sat in their living room, the same room where they'd made the decision to fight, now feeling like a lifetime ago. "I know." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "But I want Harold to win. He deserves to win." The day of the verdict, the courtroom was even more packed than during the trial. Tom and Eleanor sat with their 3 children, who'd all taken time off work to be there. Derek sat across the aisle with his lawyers, his expression impossible to read. Judge Chen entered, and everyone stood. When they sat again, the judge began to speak. "This case," she said, "has required me to balance competing claims about the final wishes of Harold Whitmore, a man I had the privilege of knowing for many years. The law requires that I determine which will represents his true testament, his final word on the disposition of his estate." Tom felt Eleanor's hand tighten on his. "The evidence presented by the estate has been thorough and compelling. Medical experts confirm that Harold Whitmore possessed testamentary capacity when he created the will found by Tom and Eleanor Parker in March 2019. Multiple attorneys have testified to his mental acuity during that period. His own video testimony, recorded when he was demonstrably competent, clearly states his intentions." Judge Chen paused, looking directly at Derek. Furthermore, the evidence of financial exploitation during Mr. Derek Whitmore's period as power of attorney is substantial and disturbing. Mr. Whitmore systematically isolated his uncle from friends and advocates, restricted his autonomy, and misappropriated funds for personal use. Derek's face was stone, but Tom saw a muscle jumping in his jaw. In contrast, Tom and Eleanor Parker have shown themselves to be exactly what they claim: faithful friends honoring the wishes of a man they loved. They have no financial stake in the outcome. They have sacrificed their own peace and resources to ensure Harold Whitmore's true intentions are honored. Their credibility is unimpeachable. Judge Chen picked up a document. "Therefore, I rule that the will probated in 2023 is invalid. The true last will and testament of Harold Whitmore is the document dated March 15, 2019, which establishes the Harold and Patricia Whitmore Foundation for Legal Aid. I am ordering the estate assets transferred to the foundation trustees immediately." The courtroom exploded in noise. Derek shot to his feet, his lawyers frantically trying to calm him. Tom felt Eleanor collapse against him, sobbing with relief. Their children surrounded them, everyone crying and hugging. Judge Chen banged her gavel. "Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for potential prosecution of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Mr. Derek Whitmore, you may face criminal charges." Derek's face went white. His lawyers pulled him toward the exit, trying to extract him before he said something that would make matters worse. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Tom and Eleanor sat in the sudden quiet, hardly able to believe it was over. 14 months of fighting, of stress, of sacrificing their peaceful retirement, and they'd won. Harold knew, Eleanor whispered. He knew we wouldn't give up. Judge Chen approached them as they were preparing to leave. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, I want you to know that what you did was extraordinary. Many people would have walked away. You didn't. You fought for your friend's legacy with everything you had." "We just did what was right," Tom said. "That's what makes it extraordinary," Judge Chen smiled. "The foundation will be established within the month. I'll be appointing a board of trustees, people who knew Harold and share his commitment to justice. If you're willing, I'd like you both to serve on that board." Tom looked at Eleanor. They'd already given so much, but this was the culmination of everything they'd fought for. "We'd be honored," Eleanor said. In the weeks that followed, the legal community rallied around the new foundation. Harold's former colleagues donated seed money. Law firms offered to provide pro bono support. Within 2 months, the Harold and Patricia Whitmore Foundation for Legal Aid opened its doors in a modest office downtown, ready to serve low-income clients throughout the county. Tom and Eleanor attended the opening ceremony, where Judge Chen gave a speech about Harold's life and legacy. She talked about his commitment to justice, his kindness, his brilliance. She talked about how he'd known that Derek would try to subvert his wishes, and how he'd put his faith in 2 friends to stop that from happening. "Harold Whitmore," Judge Chen concluded, "is not here to see this dream realized, but his spirit is in this foundation, in every client we serve, in every case we take. And his faith in the goodness of people like Tom and Eleanor Parker reminds us that justice isn't just a legal concept, it's a moral one, requiring courage and sacrifice from ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things." The audience applauded, and Tom felt tears streaming down his face. They'd done it. Against all odds, against Derek's money and lawyers and threats, they'd done it. Derek faced criminal charges for elder abuse and theft. He eventually pled guilty to a reduced charge and was sentenced to probation and ordered to repay the stolen funds. His reputation in the community was destroyed. His real estate business suffered. But more than the legal consequences, he had to live with the knowledge that his uncle had predicted his betrayal and planned for it. For Tom and Eleanor, life slowly returned to normal, though it was a new normal. They were minor celebrities in their community now, the couple who'd fought for their friend. They received letters from Harold's former clients, from people whose lives he'd touched, all thanking them for ensuring his legacy lived on. The foundation served its first clients within 3 months. A mother fighting for custody of her children, an elderly man facing eviction, an immigrant family navigating a complex legal system. All received expert legal help they couldn't have afforded otherwise. Tom and Eleanor attended board meetings monthly, helping guide the foundation's growth. It was different from their imagined retirement, busier, more engaged with the community, more purposeful. They wouldn't have chosen this path on their own, but now that they were on it, they couldn't imagine anything else. One evening, almost 2 years after finding Harold's will, they sat on their back porch watching the sunset. Eleanor had her watercolors out, painting the sky's colors. Tom was reading case summaries from the foundation's recent work. "Do you ever regret it?" Tom asked. "Everything we went through?" Eleanor considered. "The stress nearly killed you. We spent a small fortune. We lost friends. Derek still glares at us when we see him around town." She mixed colors on her palette thoughtfully. "But we gave Harold his dream. We gave Patricia her legacy. We're helping people who need help. So, no, I don't regret it." Tom smiled. "Good. Because I've been thinking we should write a book about it, about Harold, about what happened, so people understand why it mattered." "A book?" Eleanor looked skeptical. "We're not writers." "Well, learn. Besides, it's not really about the writing. It's about the story. About a man who knew he was dying and planned for it. About friends who honored their promise. About justice prevailing, even when it seemed impossible." Eleanor returned to her painting. "All right, but you're doing most of the typing. My arthritis is getting worse." They worked on the book together over the next year, writing in the mornings, attending to foundation business in the afternoons. It was slow going. They were both over 70 now, and fatigue came more easily. But they persevered, just as they'd persevered through everything else. The book, when finally published by a small local press, sold modestly, but reached the people it needed to reach. Lawyers read it and were reminded why they'd chosen their profession. Elderly people read it and took steps to protect their own estates from exploitation. Young people read it and learned that ordinary citizens could stand up to power and win. Harold and Patricia Whitmore became symbols of something important: the idea that your legacy could outlive you if you planned carefully and chose your champions well. Tom and Eleanor became symbols too, of friendship, loyalty, and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself but simply does what needs doing. On what would have been Harold's 70th anniversary of practicing law, the foundation held a memorial event. Over 100 people attended: former clients, colleagues, community members whose lives had been touched by Harold's work or by the foundation that bore his name. Tom gave a short speech, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "Harold Whitmore taught me that justice isn't abstract. It's personal. It's the single mother who gets to keep her children. It's the elderly man who keeps his home. It's the immigrant family who finds safety and stability. Harold understood that the law, at its best, protects the vulnerable, and he spent his life and his death making sure that protection continued." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "Harold also taught me about friendship, about trust, about believing that people will rise to meet the challenges you set before them. He believed Eleanor and I would fight for his dream, even when it would have been easier to walk away. And we did. Not because we're heroes, we're not, but because that's what friends do. They show up. They keep their promises. They honor the trust placed in them." The audience applauded, and Tom stepped down, feeling exhausted but satisfied. Eleanor squeezed his hand as he sat beside her. "You did good," she whispered. "We did good," he corrected. As the event continued, foundation staff presenting statistics on clients served, lives changed, justice achieved, Tom thought about that day in Storage Unit 184, when Eleanor had opened a dictionary and found an envelope that changed everything. They could have walked away, could have resealed that envelope, put it back, forgotten they'd ever seen it. Their lives would have been simpler, easier, safer. Derek would have kept his inheritance. The foundation would never have existed. Harold's dream would have died with him. But they'd chosen differently. They'd chosen to fight. And in fighting, they'd discovered something about themselves, that they were braver than they'd known, more determined, more capable of sacrifice and dedication. Tom was 73 now. His heart was weaker, his body slower. Eleanor had her own health issues. The migraines had never fully resolved, and her arthritis made painting difficult. They knew their time was limited, that the years ahead would bring increasing challenges. But they also knew they'd done something that mattered. They'd kept a promise to a friend. They'd created a lasting legacy for two people who deserved better than to be forgotten. They'd proven that justice could prevail, that ordinary people could stand up to wealth and power and win. Harold's voice echoed in Tom's memory from one of those late-night conversations on the porch. The measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, it's what you give, what you build, what you leave behind that makes the world a little better. Harold had left behind a foundation. Tom and Eleanor had left behind the proof that his faith in humanity, in friendship, in courage, in people doing the right thing even when it's hard, was justified. As the memorial event concluded and people began filtering out, Marcus Webb approached them. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "When I tried to help Harold that day at the nursing home and Derek had me removed, I felt like I'd failed him. But you two, you succeeded where I failed. You gave Harold his victory." "We just found his will," Eleanor said. "Harold did all the hard work, the planning, the documentation, the foresight. But he needed you to finish it," Marcus insisted. "He needed people who cared enough to fight for him. That's not a small thing." After Marcus left, Tom and Eleanor walked slowly to their car. The evening was warm, the kind of perfect spring night Harold had loved. Tom could almost imagine his old friend walking beside them, offering some wry comment about the proceedings, some self-deprecating joke about being memorialized. "I miss him," Tom said quietly. "I do too." Eleanor opened the car door. "But he's not really gone, is he? He's in the foundation, in every person we help. He's in the story we told. He's in what we learned about ourselves." They drove home through familiar streets, past the house where Harold had lived, past the park where they'd walked together on Sunday afternoons. Everything looked the same, but Tom knew it wasn't. They'd changed this place, made it a little better, a little more just. At home, they found a letter in their mailbox. It was from a woman named Teresa Martinez, who'd been the foundation's very first client. She'd been facing eviction, and the foundation's lawyers had found procedural errors in her landlord's filing, buying her time to catch up on rent. She'd kept her apartment, kept her children in their school, kept her life from unraveling. The letter thanked Tom and Eleanor for making the foundation possible, for fighting for Harold's dream. "You don't know me," Teresa wrote, "but you changed my life. Because you kept a promise to your friend, my children have a home. That's not a small thing, that's everything." Eleanor read the letter aloud, her voice breaking on the last words. When she finished, she and Tom sat in silence, the weight of what they'd accomplished finally settling fully on their shoulders. "It was worth it," Tom said. "Everything we went through, all the stress and fear and fighting, it was worth it for this." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where they kept the most important correspondence: letters from their children, cards from anniversaries, notes from friends. Teresa's letter would stay there, a reminder of why they'd fought, what they'd won, and what it meant to keep a promise even when it cost everything. That night, Tom dreamed of Harold again. But this time, Harold wasn't alone. Patricia was with him, and they were young, standing in front of a building with a sign, "The Harold and Patricia Whitmore Foundation for Legal Aid." They were smiling, and Harold raised his hand in a wave, not goodbye, but acknowledgement. "Thank you. Well done. Mission accomplished." Tom woke with tears on his cheeks, but they were good tears. Tears of completion, of satisfaction, of a promise kept and a duty fulfilled. Eleanor woke beside him. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," Tom said. "I just saw Harold. Him and Patricia. They're proud of us." Eleanor smiled. "Of course they are." We gave them immortality. Not the kind that comes from being famous, but the kind that comes from continuing to do good in the world long after you're gone. They lay together in the darkness, two elderly people who'd chosen courage over comfort, sacrifice over ease, and, in choosing, had discovered the best versions of themselves. Outside, the world spun on. The foundation served more clients. Derek Whitmore completed his probation and slowly rebuilt his life, carrying the stain of his actions forever. Judge Chen retired with the satisfaction of seeing justice prevail in a case she'd always believed was right. And somewhere in the records of their county, in storage units and courthouse files, the story remained, of a man who planned his legacy with care, and of two friends who honored that legacy with everything they had. The story of Harold Whitmore didn't end with his death. It continued in Teresa Martinez's children, growing up with a stable home. It continued in the hundreds of clients the foundation would serve over the coming decades. It continued in the example Tom and Eleanor set, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to care about something bigger than themselves. Years later, when Tom and Eleanor were both gone, passing peacefully within months of each other, as married couples sometimes do, their children found the journal they'd kept during the legal battle. In careful handwriting, they documented everything: the discovery of the will, the decision to fight, the trial, the victory, the foundation's growth. The last entry was dated a week before Tom's death. It said simply, "We kept our promise. Harold's dream lives on. We have no regrets." Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer donated the journal to the Foundation's archives, where it joined Harold's own papers, the legal documents, the photographs, and letters that told the complete story. And in that archive, future lawyers would study the case. Law students would write papers about estate planning and elder abuse. Ordinary people would read about Tom and Eleanor and be inspired to fight for their own causes, to keep their own promises, to be brave when bravery was needed. Harold Whitmore had been a good lawyer and a good man, but his greatest achievement wasn't any case he won or any client he served. His greatest achievement was recognizing goodness in others, in Tom and Eleanor Parker, and trusting them with his legacy. And they had proven worthy of that trust at great personal cost, because that's what real friendship demands. Not just showing up for the good times, but showing up for the hard times. Not just being there when it's easy, but being there when it matters most. In Storage Unit 184, hidden in a hollowed-out dictionary, Harold Whitmore had left more than just a will. He'd left a test, a challenge, a call to action. And Tom and Eleanor Parker had answered that call with everything they had. The foundation still operates today, now serving multiple counties, employing dozens of lawyers, helping thousands of clients. Harold and Patricia's names live on, not in marble monuments or grand buildings, but in something better. In the lives changed, the families kept together, the justice served. And somewhere, Tom and Eleanor and Harold are together again, looking down on what they built, satisfied that they got it right, that they honored friendship, kept faith, and proved that sometimes, when good people find the courage to fight, they can change the world. One storage unit at a time, one promise kept at a time, one life changed at a time. That's the real magic of what they did. Not the dramatic courtroom victory, though that mattered. Not the foundation's growth, though that mattered too. But the simple truth that when Harold Whitmore needed someone to believe in him, to fight for him, to honor his memory, two elderly people said yes. And in saying yes, they wrote the ending to Harold's story that he'd always hoped for. Not an ending at all, but a continuation, a legacy that would outlive them all. Justice for those who cannot afford it. Hope for those who've lost it. A reminder that the law, at its best, serves everyone. That was Harold and Patricia's dream. Tom and Eleanor made it real, and it endures year after year, client after life. All because two friends found a hidden will and refused to look away. All because they chose courage over comfort. All because they understood that some promises are worth keeping, no matter the cost.